For most of American history, the most important room in the house was not inside the house. It was out front, 3 steps above the sidewalk, under a roof, behind a railing. The front porch was where a family cooled down before air conditioning, greeted neighbors before telephones became constant, watched the street before television moved the world indoors, and displayed respectability before privacy became the highest luxury. It was a room with no walls, but it had rules. Who could sit there? Who could approach? Who had to sweep it? Who was served there? Who was never invited past it? Then, after World War II, America redesigned domestic life around a different entrance. The driveway, the garage, the side door, the backyard patio. By the 1950s and 1960s, the porch had not simply gone out of style. It had been replaced by a new idea of home, sealed, cooled, private, car-oriented, and turned away from the street. The front porch looked like leisure, but it was really a social machine, and when that machine stopped running, American neighborhoods changed with it. Stand in front of an American house built around 1905. It could be a bungalow on the edge of Chicago, a shotgun house in New Orleans, a mill house in North Carolina, a Queen Anne cottage in a streetcar suburb outside St. Louis, or a white frame farmhouse in a small town in Ohio. The house may be modest. It may have only 5 or 6 rooms. It may have a coal stove, a narrow kitchen, a parlor used mostly for company, and bedrooms that are smaller than any modern real estate listing would want to admit. But from the sidewalk, the first thing it gives the street is not the front door. It is the porch. A few steps rise from the yard. A roof projects forward from the house. Posts hold it up. A railing runs along the edge. The boards of the floor are worn slightly darker near the steps because that is where feet have passed over them thousands of times. There may be 2 chairs, there may be a swing, there may be a fern, a broom, a folded newspaper, a baby carriage, a bucket, a dog asleep near the railing, or a child sitting on the bottom step, close enough to hear the adults but far enough away to pretend he is not listening. The door to the house is behind all of this. But before anyone reaches that door, they have to pass through the porch. That was the porch's power. It was neither fully public nor fully private. It belonged to the family, but it faced the street. A neighbor could see it. A stranger could approach it. A salesman could stop at the bottom step and wait. A young man calling on a daughter could sit there under the eyes of her family, close enough to speak, but not private enough to threaten the rules of the household. A child could play there and still be watched from inside. The porch was the border between the house and the world. And in the America of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that border was one of the most important spaces a family owned. The street in front of that house was not yet only a traffic corridor. It was a social space. People walked there, children played there, peddlers passed there, visitors arrived there, neighbors carried news from one house to another before news came through a radio, a television, a phone, or an app. People noticed who had company, who had illness, whose son had found work, whose daughter had a caller, whose porch had been swept, and whose porch had not. The front porch let a family participate in that world without surrendering itself to it. You could be outside and still be at home. You could greet someone without inviting them into the parlor. You could watch the street without standing in it. The porch said, "We belong here, but on our own terms." By the 1880s and 1890s, that kind of space had become one of the defining features of American domestic architecture. It was not universal, and it was not the same everywhere, but in small towns, streetcar suburbs, southern cities, Midwestern bungalow districts, mill villages, and working-class neighborhoods, the porch became almost part of the language of home itself. A house with no porch could feel bare. A house with a deep porch looked settled. A house with a wraparound porch looked generous. A house with turned posts, brackets, railings, and painted trim looked respectable before anyone had crossed the threshold. The timing was not accidental. Railroads moved lumber cheaply. Industrial mills produced porch columns, railings, brackets, spindles, and trim by the thousands. Pattern books and builder catalogs made ornament easier to copy. Streetcar suburbs pushed families outward from older city centers. Working families and middle-class buyers wanted homes that could show dignity from the street. The porch became the most visible answer. It gave a plain house a face. It gave a small house an outdoor room. It gave a family with limited interior space a stage on which to appear established. But the porch was not only about appearances. Before mechanical air conditioning, the house had to negotiate with weather. It had to breathe. A deep porch shaded the front wall before the sun could heat the rooms behind it. It let windows remain open without full sun striking through them. It created a band of cooler air around the entrance. It gave the family a place to move when the rooms inside had trapped the day's heat. In a humid town in Georgia, in a river city like St. Louis, in a Midwestern bungalow district during a still July evening, the porch was not decoration. It was a climate machine made out of shade, boards, air, and habit. In the morning, someone might sit there before the heat rose. At noon, the porch could protect the doorway. By late afternoon, it became useful again. At dusk, when the kitchen stove had been burning and the upstairs rooms were close and warm, the porch might be the most livable room in the house. It did not defeat summer, it managed summer. It gave people a place between interior discomfort and full exposure. That is why people moved outside with chairs, sewing baskets, newspapers, pitchers, and bowls of beans that still needed shelling. The house was not simply occupied, it was operated according to temperature. The fresh air movement pushed that logic even further. In the early 20th century, sleeping porches appeared on many houses, especially where health reformers and physicians promoted outdoor air as medicine. Tuberculosis fears made ventilation more than comfort. It became part of domestic health culture. A screened sleeping porch could be attached to a bedroom, tucked along the side of a house, or added as a semi-outdoor room where people slept through hot nights or recovered in cleaner air than a crowded interior could provide. Today, a sleeping porch can seem quaint. In its own period, it belonged to a serious belief that architecture could help the body survive what medicine could not yet reliably cure. But the porch only worked if someone worked it. The old photograph shows a woman in a white dress, a man in a chair, children on the steps, maybe a swing and a hanging fern. It looks like leisure because that is what the image is meant to show. Begin the same scene 3 hours earlier, and the story changes. Dust has settled from the road. Pollen has collected on the rail. Coal soot has touched the sill in an industrial city. Rain has spotted the boards. Children have tracked dirt across the steps. Someone sweeps. Someone straightens the chairs. Someone waters the plant. Someone carries out cushions when the weather is good and brings them in when it changes. Someone keeps the porch ready to look effortless. In many households, that work fell to women and children. In wealthier households, especially in the South, it often fell to domestic workers. The porch is remembered as a place of hospitality, but hospitality is labor presented as grace. Someone carried the drink. Someone polished the floor. Someone moved the chair. Someone washed the railings. Someone repainted the ceiling after heat, humidity, and storms damaged it. The more effortless the porch appeared, the more completely the work had disappeared into routine. This is one of the central contradictions of the front porch. It looked like rest, but it depended on constant maintenance. That maintenance was not only practical, it was moral. A porch was the public face of the household. A clean porch suggested order. Fresh paint suggested care. Flowers suggested gentility. A sagging rail, peeling boards, broken steps, or chairs left in disorder could suggest decline, even when the real cause was illness, poverty, exhaustion, or grief. The porch was judged because it was visible, and because it was visible, the work of keeping it respectable could not easily be ignored by the people inside. The porch also turned ordinary chores into public life. Beans were shelled there, clothes were mended there, babies were rocked there, tools were repaired there, hair was combed there, children were watched there. A woman might sit in the shade and sew while also monitoring the street, receiving a neighbor, supervising children, and maintaining the public dignity of the household. A man might sit with a paper after supper, but his presence also told the street that the family had someone at home. Children on the steps were playing, but they were also learning the rules of visibility. The porch was domestic life with an audience. By 1900, that audience had made the porch one of America's most important social stages. It hosted courtship, gossip, political talk, visiting, music, children's games, and evening rituals. Even presidential politics understood the symbolism. The Front Porch campaign worked because Americans recognized the porch as the place where private virtue could be performed in public. The candidate at home, speaking from his own porch, suggested stability, domestic respectability, and civic trust. The household porch did the same thing on a smaller scale every evening. A family sitting outside was not invisible. It was presenting itself, not formally but visibly. The father in his chair, the mother with sewing, the children on the steps, the clean floorboards, the swept entrance. The porch said, "This family is settled. This family belongs. This family can be approached but not entered without permission." That distinction mattered. A porch allowed hospitality without surrender. A neighbor might be invited up but not inside. A caller might sit near the door but not cross it. A stranger might be acknowledged without being welcomed. The porch made contact possible while still preserving distance. That distance was not always gentle. The porch created community, but it also enforced hierarchy. In segregated America, not everyone approached the same porch in the same way. Who could come up the steps, who stopped at the gate, who stood while others sat, who served, and who was served. These things depended on race, class, gender, and local custom. A white Southern porch could present itself as hospitality while resting on exclusion and domestic labor. A black porch in the same era might mean something entirely different: safety, kinship, music, conversation, cultural life, and a protected edge in a society where many public spaces were hostile. Same boards, different worlds. This is why nostalgia simplifies the porch. Memory likes the porch because it looks warm, it looks neighborly, it looks human, and often it was. But it was also a gatekeeping space, a watching platform, a labor site, and a stage on which households performed class, gender, and respectability. The porch was never innocent. It was powerful precisely because it could welcome and exclude at the same time. The first serious crack in that power came not from air conditioning but from the automobile. At first, cars and porches lived together. A street in 1915 could still hold pedestrians, wagons, bicycles, children, streetcars, and slow automobiles in the same field of vision. But as cars multiplied, the street changed speed. A neighbor walking past could look up and speak. A driver behind glass and metal was gone before the greeting formed. A child could play in a street of slow wagons and pedestrians. A child could not play the same way in a street of moving cars. The porch still faced the street, but the street was becoming less social and more mechanical. Then the car changed the entrance to the house. At first the garage was separate, often behind the house, a small building at the rear of the lot. The family still came through the front, but over time, the driveway became part of daily life. The garage moved closer, then it attached, then it became the entrance most family members actually used. People came home through the side door, the back door, the kitchen door, and eventually through the garage. The front porch remained visible, but it was no longer the household's daily threshold. This is how a room begins to die without being demolished. The structure remains, the routine leaves. Radio weakened another function. For decades, the porch had been one of the places where information traveled. Neighbors brought news, visitors brought news, children carried news from house to house. The street itself was a communication system. Radio brought the world indoors. Music, sermons, politics, market reports, baseball games, emergencies, and evening entertainment entered the living room. The family no longer had to sit outside to hear the world. The porch remained useful, but one of its old jobs had been taken away. After World War II, the larger transformation arrived. Air conditioning did not simply make houses cooler, it changed what people expected a house to be. The porch cooled by working with the outside. Air conditioning cooled by rejecting it. The porch depended on shade, breeze, orientation, time of day, open windows, and the willingness of people to move with the weather. The thermostat offered a different bargain. Close the window, shut the door, set the temperature. Comfort no longer had to be negotiated with the season. This did not happen to every family at once. Air conditioning was expensive at first, and many households continued using fans, porches, open windows, and shade well into the mid-20th century. But the ideal shifted. The modern house was becoming sealed, insulated, mechanically cooled, and protected from dust, insects, humidity, traffic noise, and strangers. Deep porches mattered less. Sleeping porches lost their urgency. Windows no longer had to organize daily life. The old house had cooperated with climate, the new house increasingly conquered it. Once the porch no longer had to cool the house, it had to survive as style. That is a weaker position. A feature needed every day can survive fashion. A feature admired occasionally becomes optional. The porch moved from infrastructure to charm. Charm is marketable, but it is also expendable when repair costs rise, tastes change, or the family stops using the space. Television did to the evening what air conditioning did to the weather. It moved the gathering point inward and fixed it to a screen. The old porch arranged people toward the street. Television arranged people toward the living room wall. On the porch, interruption was part of the experience. A neighbor passing, a child calling, a dog barking, a storm forming, a visitor coming up the walk. Television asked the household to sit, face one direction, and watch. The porch connected the family to the rhythm of the block. Television connected it to the rhythm of the nation. This was not simply a loss. Television brought entertainment, information, shared events, comedy, news, sports, and a new kind of domestic pleasure. For tired families, it was easier than sitting outside. For children, it was more vivid than the street. For adults, it brought the world into a cooled room. But architecturally, the consequence was clear. The evening no longer needed the porch. The neighborhood no longer supplied the main performance. The screen did. At the same time, outdoor life did not disappear. It moved behind the house. This is the part of the story that matters most. America did not abandon the outdoors, it privatized it. The backyard patio, the deck, the barbecue grill, the swing set, the swimming pool, the fenced lawn, these became the new outdoor rooms. The front porch said, "We live near the street." The backyard said, "We live away from it." The porch placed domestic life on a public edge. The post-war suburb moved domestic life out of sight. That shift made sense. Privacy is not a small thing. A backyard let adults relax without being watched by every passerby. It gave children a place away from traffic. It allowed family life to happen without the performance of respectability. The grill did not require greeting a neighbor. The patio did not require sweeping for the sidewalk. The deck did not ask the household to be available. In a culture increasingly organized around private comfort, the backyard was easier to love than the front porch, but the street paid the price. Fewer adults sat facing it. Fewer children played where multiple households could see them. Fewer casual. Greetings happened without effort. Fewer people knew the daily rhythm of the block. The porch had been both intrusive and protective. It made people visible when they might not want to be visible, but it also created witnesses. When families moved to the backyard, the public edge of the house grew quiet. The old porches met different fates. Some survived beautifully, especially in older neighborhoods where the original architecture still mattered. Some remained because families continued to use them. Some remained because no one had the money to alter them. Others were enclosed. First with screens, then with glass, then with insulation, flooring, curtains, heat, and furniture. A screened porch still belonged partly to the outside. A glassed-in porch became another room, a sunroom, a Florida room, a three-season room. The outline survived, but the threshold changed. The porch was absorbed by the house. Other porches were removed. Wood rotted. Railings failed. Roofs leaked. Steps sagged. Repair was expensive. In neighborhoods already hurt by disinvestment, removing a porch could be cheaper than restoring it. A deep wood porch became a small concrete stoop. Columns disappeared. Railings were replaced with metal pipe. Decorative trim was torn away. The house still had a front door, but the room that once mediated between the house and street had been amputated. Block by block, the social architecture of older neighborhoods thinned out. Some porches became only symbols, a chair outside, but no one sitting in it. A porch swing, but rarely used. Flowers arranged for curb appeal, a renovated facade suggesting community to buyers who would enter through the garage. This is why old porch neighborhoods can feel melancholy. The architecture still suggests conversation. The street may still look ready for evening life, but the chairs are empty. The house remembers a behavior the household no longer practices. Then, late in the 20th century, the porch began to return. Not as necessity, but as desire. New urbanist planners promoted it as part of walkable neighborhood design. Developers used it to signal charm and community. Preservationists restored old examples. Home buyers responded to the idea of a house that faced the street again. Porch festivals turned front porches into public music stages. Builders added porches to new houses, even in communities where the garage remained the real entrance and the backyard remained the real outdoor room. The irony is sharp. America abandoned the porch because the old system was inconvenient. Then America began buying the image of the porch because the absence of that system felt lonely. A new porch could suggest walkability, neighborliness, Southern charm, small-town memory, or architectural authenticity. But many new porches are too shallow to function as real rooms. They are deep enough for a photograph, not for a family. They face streets where few people walk. They sit beside driveways that carry the actual life of the house. They quote the old porch without always restoring the conditions that made the old porch work. A porch cannot work alone. It needs a street worth watching. It needs sidewalks. It needs shade. It needs neighbors moving slowly enough to recognize one another. It needs a household willing to sit where it can be seen. It needs enough trust for people to linger. It needs a culture that tolerates interruption. Posts and railings can invite that life, but they cannot create it by themselves. Architecture can make a behavior possible. It cannot force a society to want the behavior again. So, what did America lose when it abandoned the front porch? Not innocence. The porch was never innocent. It carried labor, hierarchy, exclusion, judgment, surveillance, and unequal access. It was not a perfect democratic commons, but it did force a relationship between private life and the public street. That relationship mattered. It made casual contact easier. It made absence noticeable. It made small acts of neighborliness routine instead of scheduled. It made the household visible enough to be recognized by others. When the porch declined, Americans gained real things: cooler rooms, quieter evenings, less dust, fewer insects, more privacy, safer backyards, more control over who saw them and when. These were not imaginary. Benefits. Progress is powerful because it solves actual problems, but progress rarely solves only the problem it names. It changes the habits around the solution, it changes where people sit, it changes which door they use, it changes what children hear in the evening, it changes who notices when a chair stays empty. Today, the old porch functions still exist, but they have been separated into machines and platforms. The thermostat cools, the television entertains, the garage receives, the patio relaxes, the doorbell camera watches, the phone carries gossip, the neighborhood app issues warnings, social media displays the household, delivery services approach the front door without conversation. The old porch was one place doing all of those jobs at once. Modern life has divided them into systems that are more efficient and less human. Drive through an older American neighborhood now and you can still see the remains of the earlier arrangement. A bungalow with 2 chairs on a low porch, a mill house with peeling boards and a broom by the door, a southern cottage with a swing under the roof, a row of shotgun houses where the porch sits close to the sidewalk, a Victorian house whose porch has been enclosed so long that the new windows feel original, a suburban house with a decorative porch too narrow to hold more than a package. Each one tells a version of the same story. The porch survived as wood, paint, memory, symbol, and sometimes still as life. The front porch did not die because Americans stopped needing one another. It died because Americans found easier ways to be comfortable without one another. The breeze was replaced by the thermostat. The evening street was replaced by television. The front steps were replaced by the driveway. The porch chair was replaced by the sofa. The neighbor passing by was replaced by the screen. The house did not just change shape, it changed direction. It turned inward. Maybe that was inevitable. Maybe no family, after living through heat, mosquitoes, dust, road noise, social pressure, and constant visibility, could be expected to choose the old porch over cool air and a private room. But the loss remains. Not because the porch was perfect, and not because the past was kinder than the present. The loss remains because the porch created a shared threshold, and shared thresholds are rare now. For roughly half a century, from the late 19th century into the early 20th, the American front porch gave domestic life one of its most important edges. It was a climate machine, a labor site, a status signal, a gatekeeping space, a watching platform, and a social room under open air. Then, the edge went quiet. The houses remained. The porches remained, some of them. The chairs remained, here and there. But the old system was gone. America did not simply abandon the porch. It abandoned the daily practice of facing the street. The question now is not whether we can build porches again. We already do. The question is whether we still know how to live on them.